Long before France became the land of revolutions, art, and romance, it was a wild and fragmented world, a land of forests, rivers, and tribes that did not yet know they were destined to form one of the greatest nations in history. The story of France does not begin with kings or castles, but with the earth itself shaped by glaciers, carved by rivers like the Seine, Loire, and Rhine, and inhabited by mysterious people who would later be known as the Gauls. Thousands of years before the word France ever existed, prehistoric humans roamed these fertile lands. They hunted in the dense woods of what is now Burgundy and painted the walls of caves in regions like Lascaux, leaving behind images of bison and deer that tell of a world where survival depended on nature as rhythm. These early people, who lived around 30,000 years ago, were not French in the modern sense, but they laid the first human footprints on the soil that would one day be called France. Their stone tools, bones, and cave paintings reveal a society that understood art, community, and spirituality long before history began to record names or kingdoms. As time moved forward, new groups arrived. Around 6000 BCE, farming communities began to appear, bringing with them the seeds of civilization. They cleared forests, built small villages, and domesticated animals, transforming the land from wilderness into farmland. These early farmers belonged to the Neolithic era, and their legacy can still be seen in the megalithic monuments that dot western France's great stone structures like the Carnac stones in Brittany. Thousands of massive stones stand in rows, their purpose still uncertain. Were they temples, burial grounds, or astronomical observatories? No one truly knows, but their presence reveals a culture capable of organization, belief, and monumental ambition. It was during this period that the people of ancient France began to form tribal identities and traditions, each with its own customs and languages. By 1000 BCE, the Bronze Age and then the Iron Age began to shape Europe. Trade networks stretched across the continent, linking the tribes of Gaul with distant lands such as Greece, Etruria, and the Mediterranean islands. Bronze weapons and ornaments gave way to iron swords and tools, changing the balance of power among the tribes. The people who dominated what is now France during this time were known collectively as the Celts, or, as the Romans would later call them, the Gauls. They were not a single nation, but a mosaic of tribes: the Parisii around the Seine, the Aedui in Burgundy, the Arverni in central France, and dozens more, each with its own territory, leadership, and sacred sites. They shared a common Celtic language and belief system, worshiping gods tied to nature gods of rivers, forests, war, and fertility. Druids served as priests, scholars, and judges, holding immense influence across tribal societies. The Gauls lived in fortified towns called oppida, built on hilltops for defense, and they controlled large areas of farmland and trade routes that connected to the rest of Europe. The Gauls were fierce warriors and skilled craftsmen. Their metalwork was admired across Europe, and their long swords and intricate jewelry reflected a culture that prized both beauty and strength. But despite their wealth and unity of culture, the Gauls were divided politically. Tribal rivalries often erupted into wars, and alliances shifted frequently. This fragmentation would eventually make them vulnerable to one of history's most powerful empires, the Romans. Yet before that clash, the Gauls had already built a vibrant civilization. Their trade with the Greeks brought luxury goods like wine and pottery into their society, and in return, they exported salt, metals, and slaves. The Greek colony of Massalia, modern-day Marseille, founded around 600 BCE by sailors from Phrygia, became a key trading hub that connected the Mediterranean world to the heart of Gaul. Through this port, the Gauls encountered new ideas, technologies, and perhaps even the first glimpses of written language. But the story of France's birth cannot be told through trade alone. It was a story of identity forming out of chaos, a slow merging of tribes, beliefs, and external influences that would later give rise to the concept of a single people. By the 5th century BCE, the Gauls were known across Europe for their courage in battle. They raided Rome itself around 390 BCE, led by the chieftain Brennus, who famously demanded gold from the Romans as ransom and uttered the chilling words, "Vi victis," woe to the vanquished. This moment would echo through history, reminding both Gauls and Romans of their power and pride. Yet even in victory, the Gauls remained fractured. Each tribe pursued its own destiny, and without unity, their independence was fragile. Meanwhile, across the Mediterranean, Rome was rising. What began as a small city-state was becoming a force destined to conquer the known world. By the 2nd century BCE, Roman expansion brought them ever closer to Gaul. The lands of southern France, including Provence, became the first to fall under Roman control after a series of campaigns against the local tribes. The region was transformed into the Roman province of Gallia Narbonensis. Roads, aqueducts, and cities began to appear, blending Roman architecture with local culture. For the Gauls who lived there, life began to change forever. Latin replaced Celtic languages in administration. Roman laws were imposed, and local leaders were turned into Roman allies. The seeds of Romanization were planted, but the heart of Gaul still remained free until one man changed everything. That man was Julius Caesar. In 58 BCE, Caesar launched his famous campaign known as the Gallic Wars. Over the next 8 years, he led the Roman legions deep into the heart of Gaul, facing fierce resistance from tribes that refused to bow. Among them rose one of the greatest leaders in ancient European history, Vercingetorix, the young and charismatic chieftain of the Arverni tribe. Vercingetorix understood what others before him had not. Only unity could save Gaul. He united dozens of tribes under his command and used guerrilla tactics to harass the Roman legions, burning crops and denying them supplies. His leadership inspired hope across the land. The climax came at the fortress city of Alesia in 52 BCE. Surrounded by Caesar's forces, Vercingetorix and his army fought bravely, but the Romans' engineering and discipline prevailed. After weeks of siege, the Gallic forces were crushed. Vercingetorix surrendered, offering himself to save his people, and was taken to Rome in chains. Years later, he was executed after being paraded through the streets during Caesar's triumph. His death marked the end of Gallic independence and the beginning of a new chapter in the land's history. With Gaul conquered, Rome imposed its rule, but it also transformed the region. The Romans built roads, bridges, and amphitheaters. Cities like Lugdunum, Lyon, Lutetia, Paris, and Burdigala, Bordeaux, flourished as centers of trade and culture. Latin became the common language, blending with local dialects to form the roots of the French language that would emerge centuries later. Roman law, architecture, and religion reshaped daily life. Temples to Jupiter and Mars stood where sacred groves once lay, and Roman baths and theaters became symbols of civilization. Yet beneath this Roman veneer, the spirit of the Gauls endured. They adapted to Roman life, but their traditions, festivals, and local gods persisted quietly among the people. Gaul became one of the most prosperous provinces of the Roman Empire, known for its fertile lands, wine, and strong soldiers. Roman emperors even came from Gaul, most notably Claudius, born in Lugdunum, who would later conquer Britain. For centuries, Gaul thrived under Roman rule. Roads connected every corner of the land, trade flourished, and cities grew wealthy. But empires, no matter how powerful, are not eternal. By the 3rd century CE, cracks began to appear. Barbarian tribes, Franks, Alemanni, Goths, and Vandals pressed against the Roman frontiers. The Rhine River, once the boundary of Rome's strength, became a line of defense under constant threat. Gaul suffered invasions, plagues, and economic decline. Roman authority weakened, and local leaders began to take power into their own hands. In some regions, Roman generals declared themselves independent rulers, forming short-lived empires within Gaul itself. One such figure, Postumus, even established the so-called Gallic Empire in the 260s CE, ruling as a breakaway emperor for nearly 15 years. Though his empire eventually fell, it symbolized Gaul's growing sense of autonomy and identity apart from Rome. As the centuries turned, Christianity began to spread across Gaul. Missionaries arrived from Rome and the East, preaching the new faith to a people still steeped in pagan traditions. Churches replaced temples, and saints replaced gods. Figures like Saint Martin of Tours and Saint Denis of Paris became central to the spiritual transformation of the land. By the 4th century, Gaul was no longer purely Roman. It was Roman, Christian, and still deeply Celtic at heart. This blending of cultures, beliefs, and bloodlines was forging something new, something distinctly different from the empire that had once ruled it. And then came the final blow to Roman rule in the West. In the 5th century, waves of Germanic tribes poured into Roman territories. Among them were the Franks, a confederation of tribes from the lower Rhine region. The Franks were warriors, known for their bravery and adaptability. They did not simply invade Gaul. They settled in it, merging with the local population. Under their leader Clovis, the Franks began to carve out a new kingdom from the ruins of the Roman world. Clovis was ambitious, shrewd, and ruthless. In a series of campaigns, he defeated rival tribes and conquered most of northern and central Gaul. His greatest achievement, however, was not military, it was spiritual. After victory in battle, Clovis converted to Christianity, becoming the first Catholic king among the Germanic peoples. This conversion won him the support of the powerful Roman Church and unified his people under a single faith. The name Francia, the land of the Franks, was born from this moment. It was not yet the France we know today, but it was the beginning. The Roman world had ended, and from its ashes, a new identity emerged. The Franks preserved many aspects of Roman governance, using Latin for administration and maintaining cities and laws. But they also brought their own customs, language, and warrior traditions. Over time, the fusion of Gallic Roman and Frankish elements gave birth to medieval France. This transformation was not sudden, it took centuries. But it all began in the chaos of the 5th century, when a young warrior king and his people began to dream of a new order. The Gauls were gone, the Romans had retreated, and yet something survived. The land itself, the people who tilled it, and the memory of unity under leaders like Vercingetorix. That ancient spirit, mixed with the strength of the Franks, would give birth to the Kingdom of France. And though centuries of darkness, war, and change lay ahead, the foundation had been laid. From prehistoric tribes to Celtic warriors, from Roman citizens to Frankish kings, the story of France's beginning was one of survival, transformation, and rebirth. The land that once belonged to many now began to move toward becoming one. As the last remnants of Rome faded and new powers rose, the rivers of Gaul continued to flow as they always had the silent witnesses of history. Villages grew where Roman villas once stood. Monks copied manuscripts in candlelit monasteries, preserving the knowledge of a lost empire. And in the ruins of old cities, a new civilization was slowly taking form. The people no longer called themselves Romans. They began to call themselves Franks. And from that name, through the long march of time, would come a word that would echo through history France. When Rome's final light dimmed and its empire crumbled, what rose from its ashes in the lands once called Gaul was something entirely new. The old Roman roads still cut through forests and fields, their stones worn by centuries of feet and wheels. Crumbling amphitheaters stood silent under the weight of moss and time, reminders of a world that once believed it would never fall. In their place came the sound of horsemen, tribes, and chieftains carving new destinies out of the corpse of empire. Among those tribes, one name would shape the next 1,000 years: the Franks. They came from the Lower Rhine, a confederation of Germanic tribes hardened by centuries of warfare against Rome. And yet, unlike others who destroyed everything they touched, the Franks did something different. They built upon what they conquered. Their leader, Clovis, was a young, ambitious warrior of the Merovingian family, a dynasty that would become the first royal house of what we now call France. Clovis's rise began in blood and cunning. He united the various Frankish tribes under his rule through diplomacy, force, and ruthless ambition. By around 486 CE, he set his sights on the last remnant of Roman authority in Gaul, a Roman general named Syagrius, who ruled a small territory around Soissons. The battle that followed was swift and decisive. Clovis defeated Syagrius and took control of northern Gaul. From that victory onward, Clovis was more than just a tribal chieftain. He was a king in a land of shifting loyalties, where Roman towns, Celtic traditions, and Germanic customs intertwined. Yet what truly defined him was not his conquest of territory, but his mastery of transformation. Clovis understood that ruling Gaul required more than a sword. It required legitimacy, something the fading shadow of Rome still carried. The turning point came a few years later when Clovis, in the midst of battle, faced overwhelming odds. According to legend, his army was on the brink of destruction when he prayed to the Christian god of his wife Clotilde, promising to convert if victory was granted. Against all expectation, he won that true to his word. Clovis accepted baptism, an act that would change not just his destiny, but that of an entire nation. Unlike many of the other Germanic kings who had adopted the Arian form of Christianity, a version deemed heretical by Rome, Clovis embraced Catholicism, aligning himself with the Roman Church and the Gallo-Roman population who still followed it. This move was brilliant. Overnight, he transformed himself from a barbarian invader into a divinely sanctioned ruler. His conversion was celebrated by the clergy, and his kingdom gained moral authority in the eyes of both the church and his subjects. The baptism of Clovis, performed by Saint Remigius in the city of Reims, became a cornerstone of French identity. It marked the symbolic birth of the alliance between the French monarchy and the Catholic Church, a relationship that would shape European history for more than 1,000 years. From that day onward, French kings would be seen not only as rulers by might, but as sovereigns by divine right. Clovis's power expanded rapidly after his conversion. He conquered rival tribes, subdued enemies, and forged alliances through marriage and diplomacy. By the time of his death in 511 CE, his kingdom stretched from the Rhine to the Pyrenees, uniting nearly all of Gaul under his rule. It was the first time since Rome that the region had known a single master. But Clovis's death also revealed the weakness that would haunt the Merovingians, the tendency to divide their realm among sons, following old Frankish custom. His kingdom was split into several parts, each ruled by his heirs, leading to centuries of internal strife. Yet even amid division, the foundation of a new civilization was taking shape. Roman towns slowly adapted to Frankish customs, gradually becoming the language that would one day be called Old French. Christianity spread through every village and valley. These monasteries preserved not only the Holy Scriptures, but also fragments of Roman knowledge, law, science, and literature that would have otherwise vanished. The Merovingian kings, descendants of Clovis, ruled for nearly 2 centuries. Some were great leaders, others weak and forgotten. They were called the long-haired kings, as their uncut hair symbolized royal power. Their court, filled with warriors and nobles, was both barbaric and sacred, a blend of Germanic ritual and Christian ceremony. Kings like Dagobert I sought to strengthen royal authority, building churches and supporting the clergy. Under Dagobert's reign in the 7th century, the kingdom reached a degree of stability and cultural growth. But over time, real control slipped away from the kings and into the hands of their administrators, the mayors of the palace. These powerful officials, originally meant to manage royal estates, gradually became the true rulers behind the throne. One of these mayors, a man named Pepin of Herstal, rose to prominence in the late 7th century. He was a descendant of the Arnulfing family, a lineage that would eventually eclipse the Merovingians themselves. Pepin's influence extended across the Frankish realms, and his descendants would form the next great dynasty, the Carolingians. His grandson, Charles Martel, would become one of the most important figures in early French history. Known as the Hammer, Charles Martel was a warrior and statesman who defended the Frankish kingdom against foreign threats. His most famous moment came in 732 CE at the Battle of Tours. The Muslim armies, having swept across North Africa and conquered much of Spain, the Frankish infantry, disciplined and determined, held their ground against the cavalry of the Caliphate. When the fighting ended, the invaders retreated and the Franks had triumphed. Historians later hailed this victory as the moment that preserved Christian Europe from Islamic expansion, though in truth it was as much about power and territory as religion. Nonetheless, the battle elevated Charles Martel to legendary status and solidified the strength of the Carolingian line. Martel's leadership also laid the groundwork for the rebirth of centralized authority in the Frankish lands. He reorganized the army, granted lands to loyal warriors in exchange for service, and strengthened ties with the Church, which viewed him as a protector of Christendom. When Charles died, his sons inherited a united and powerful realm, but it was his grandson, Charlemagne Charles the Great, who would take the Frankish kingdom to unimaginable heights. By the mid-8th century, the Merovingian kings were little more than figureheads known derisively as do-nothing kings. The true power lay with the mayors of the palace. In 751 CE, Pepin the Short, son of Charles Martel, decided to end the pretense. With the blessing of the Pope, he deposed the last Merovingian king and crowned himself as the first Carolingian monarch. This act, sanctified by the Church, forever intertwined the destiny of France with that of Rome's spiritual successor, the papacy. The alliance between the Carolingians and the Church gave the new dynasty unprecedented legitimacy. Pepin's reign strengthened royal control, and his reforms laid the groundwork for his son's empire. Charlemagne inherited a kingdom of strength and faith, but he dreamed far bigger. His conquests extended across Europe to Italy, Saxony, Bavaria, and beyond. His armies marched under the sign of the cross, and wherever they went, they carried not only swords, but priests and scribes. In 800 CE, in the grandest moment of early medieval Europe, Charlemagne knelt in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. For the first time in centuries, Western Europe once again had an emperor. Under Charlemagne, the Frankish kingdom became the Carolingian Empire, stretching from the Atlantic to the Danube. His rule brought a semblance of order to a continent long fractured by war and chaos. He established schools to educate clergy and nobles, promoted Latin literacy, and revived art and architecture in what historians call the Carolingian Renaissance. Monasteries flourished, scriptoria copied ancient texts, and a new standardized handwriting Carolingian minuscule was developed, influencing modern European scripts. Charlemagne's administration relied on loyal counts and bishops who governed local regions under his authority. Messengers known as missi dominici traveled throughout the realm to ensure justice and loyalty. He built a capital at Aachen, where his palace complex symbolized both royal grandeur and divine mission. But as with the Merovingians before him, Charlemagne's legacy carried both greatness and fragility. When he died in 814 CE, his empire passed to his son, Louis the Pious, whose reign saw growing internal strife. After Louis's death, his sons divided the empire among themselves, following the old Frankish custom that had so often weakened unity. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 CE split the empire into three parts: East Francia, West Francia, and Middle Francia. West Francia, ruled by Charles the Bald, roughly corresponded to modern-day France. This division marks a crucial moment in the birth of France as a distinct kingdom. While East Francia evolved into Germany, West Francia became the seed from which France would grow. The new kingdom faced immense challenges. Paris itself was besieged several times by Norse invaders sailing up the Seine. The once mighty Carolingian state fractured into smaller feudal territories, controlled by local lords and counts who owed only nominal loyalty to the king. The language continued to evolve away from Latin, forming Old French dialects spoken by nobles and peasants alike. The church remained a unifying force, binding the people through faith and ritual. By the late 9th century, the Carolingian line in West Francia began to falter. Among these new powers, one family stood out: the Robertians, descendants of noble Frankish warriors. In 987 CE, after the death of the last Carolingian king, the nobles of France elected Hugh Capet, a Robertian duke, as king. His coronation marked the end of the Carolingian era and the dawn of the Capetian dynasty, which would rule France for more than 300 years. But behind this moment lay the long and winding journey that started centuries earlier with Clovis's sword, with Vercingetorix's defiance, with Caesar's conquest, and with the nameless tribes who once roamed the forests of Gaul. It is a story of layers, tribes upon tribes, faith upon faith, empire upon empire. They did not erase the Gauls. They became their heirs, and through war, faith, and resilience, they forged a kingdom that would one day stand as the heart of Europe. From the forests of the Rhine to the plains of Aquitaine, from the ruins of Roman towns to the towers of medieval cathedrals, the land had transformed. The people who once called themselves Romans or Franks were beginning to call themselves something else: Francorum Regnum, the kingdom of the Franks, or simply France. The age of Charlemagne and his descendants may have ended in division, but its legacy endured in every church, charter, and castle that followed. The Frankish idea of kingship rooted in divine right, supported by the church, and tempered by warrior tradition, would define French monarchy for a millennium. The monks of Tours, the scholars of Aachen, and the nobles of Paris all carried forward a sense of destiny that tied their fractured world to something larger. The belief that France was not just a kingdom, but a chosen realm. In the centuries ahead, France would rise from its feudal past to become a nation of cathedrals, crusades, and kings crowned by popes. But its origins, the untold ancient story, lie here, in the transformation from Roman Gaul to Frankish Empire. It was in the merging of bloodlines and languages, in the forging of faith and crown, that France began to breathe as one body. And though the Middle Ages would bring new trials, wars, and revolutions of their own, and the vision of Charlemagne all echoed through the centuries, shaping not only France, but all of Europe, the dawn of France had arrived, not in a single moment, but through centuries of struggle and rebirth. From the ashes of empire rose a kingdom that would one day become a nation, and from the voices of countless forgotten tribes and kings. When Hugh Capet was crowned King of the Franks in 987 CE, few could have imagined that his modest coronation would ignite a dynasty that would shape the destiny of Europe for centuries. At that moment, the kingdom he inherited was little more than a patchwork of feudal territories, a fragile realm whose king ruled only a small portion directly around Paris and Orleans. The rest of France belonged to powerful dukes and counts who acted like kings in their own right: the Duke of Normandy in the north, the Count of Anjou, the Duke of Aquitaine, and the Count of Toulouse, each commanding vast lands, armies, and wealth. Hugh Capet's crown was more symbolic than sovereign. Yet symbols have power, and Hugh understood that patience, faith, and lineage could build an empire where swords alone could not. His first and greatest achievement was survival, maintaining the throne and passing it peacefully to his son, Robert II. thus establishing a hereditary monarchy that would outlast revolutions, wars, and empires. The Capetian kings were not mighty conquerors at first. They were careful, pragmatic, and deeply aware of their limitations. They built alliances with the church, strengthened ties with bishops, and used marriage to weave networks of loyalty. Each generation sought to expand royal authority inch by inch, often not through battle, but through law, faith, and diplomacy. The church became their most reliable ally, for in an age where kings ruled by divine sanction, the blessing of the clergy was worth more than 1,000 soldiers. The Capetians understood that while they could not immediately control all of France, they could shape the idea of France, a sacred realm ordained by God, where the king's authority, however limited in practice, was absolute in principle. Robert II, called Robert the Pious, reigned with humility and faith, strengthening the image of the monarchy as a moral and Christian institution. He was followed by his son, Henry I, and then by Philip I, who continued the slow work of royal consolidation. Yet it was under Louis VI, known as Louis the Fat, that the Capetians began to truly assert power. Louis spent much of his reign subduing rebellious lords in the Isle de France, the royal heartland. He recognized that before conquering distant provinces, the king must first be master of his own domain. With the help of his loyal advisor and chronicler, Suger, abbot of Saint Denis, Louis reformed administration, supported towns, and curbed the violence of robber barons who terrorized the countryside. His reign marked the beginning of the French monarchy's long transformation from a feudal kingship into a centralized estate. Louis VI's son, Louis VII, carried his father's legacy forward, though his reign would be marked by one of the most famous and disastrous adventures in medieval history, the Second Crusade. In 1147, responding to the Pope's call to reclaim the Holy Land after the fall of Edessa, Louis led a vast army across Europe and into the East. His queen, Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most remarkable women of the age, accompanied him. The journey was plagued by poor planning, treachery, and defeat. The crusade failed, and the royal marriage crumbled under the strain. When Louis divorced Eleanor, she married Henry, Duke of Normandy, soon to become Henry II of England. With that union, nearly half of France's lands fell under English control, creating the vast Angevin Empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. What had begun as a royal marriage ended as a geopolitical catastrophe for France, sowing the seeds of centuries of conflict between the French and English crowns. Yet out of this loss would come renewal. When Louis VII's son, Philip II, ascended the throne in 1180, France entered a new era. Known to history as Philip Augustus, he was the first king to truly earn the title King of France rather than King of the Franks. Philip was a statesman, strategist, and visionary. He reformed administration, appointed loyal officials called baillis to enforce royal law, and brought order to the chaotic patchwork of feudal rule. But it was his conflict with the English kings Henry II and his formidable sons Richard the Lionheart and John that defined his reign. Through cunning diplomacy and relentless warfare, Philip dismantled the Angevin Empire piece by piece. When King John of England lost Normandy in 1204, it was a turning point in French history. The great duchy that had once produced William the Conqueror was now part of the French crown, and for the first time, the king's power extended deep into the northern territories. Paris, now secure, began to flourish as the heart of the realm. Under Philip Augustus, France began to look like a real kingdom. Roads were improved, markets expanded, and fortifications rose along the frontiers. Paris became a center of learning, with the University of Paris later, known as the Sorbonne, emerging as one of Europe's great intellectual hubs. Scholars debated theology, philosophy, and law under the vaulted ceilings of Gothic halls, while merchants filled the streets with goods from Flanders, Italy, and the Levant. In this age, The French identity took root not merely as a feudal territory, but as a cultural and spiritual community. The French language began to replace Latin in royal documents, and for the first time, La Religion de France was spoken of as a unified nation under God and King. Philip's successors continued to expand both the territory and the prestige of the crown. His son, Louis VIII, briefly ruled before his death, but it was his grandson, Louis X, known to history as Saint Louis, who elevated the French monarchy to unparalleled moral authority. Reigning from 1226 to 1270, Louis IX was the embodiment of medieval kingship. He was deeply devout, fair, and just, ruling not only with a sword, but with a conscience. His court at Paris became a model of chivalry and Christian virtue. He reformed the legal system, establishing the Parliament of Paris as the kingdom's supreme court. He prohibited private warfare among nobles, curbed corruption, and introduced the practice of royal justice, where subjects could appeal directly to the king. To his people, he was not just a ruler, but a saintly figure who walked among them with humility and grace. Louis IX's piety extended beyond his borders. He led 2 crusades, one to Egypt and another to Tunisia, seeking to reclaim the Holy Land. Though both campaigns ended in failure and his eventual death, his devotion left an indelible mark on the medieval imagination. Canonized after his death, Saint Louis became the only French king officially declared a saint by the Catholic Church, a symbol of divine kingship that reinforced the sacred nature of the monarchy. His reign was the high point of the Capetian Age, when France stood as the most powerful and admired kingdom in Christendom. Cathedrals rose across the land, Notre Dame de Paris, Chartres, Amiens, each a stone symphony to faith and national pride. Their towering spires reached toward heaven, while their intricate stained glass told the story of humanity's salvation and France's divine mission. As the 13th century drew to a close, the Capetian kings continued their careful balancing act of expansion and consolidation. Philip III and Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, strengthened the monarchy's control, but also clashed with the papacy. Philip IV was ambitious, intelligent, and unyielding. He reorganized the kingdom's finances, introduced new taxes, and sought to bring even the powerful Knights Templar under his authority. His dispute with Pope Boniface VIII over the limits of royal versus papal power culminated in the humiliation of the Pope and the eventual relocation of the papal seat to Avignon-Aumauve that shifted the center of Christendom closer to France. Philip's reign marked the height of royal authority, but it also sowed the seeds of future turmoil. The burden of taxation, the suppression of the Templars, and his aggressive policies strained the unity of the realm. When the direct Capetian line ended in 1328 with the death of Charles IV, France faced a crisis of succession. The nearest male relative was Philip of Valois, who became Philip VI, founding the Valois dynasty. But across the Channel, the English King Edward III, who was also a grandson of Philip IV through his mother, claimed the French crown. The dispute ignited one of the longest and most devastating conflicts in medieval history, the 100 Years' War. It would transform France once again, dragging it through fire and chaos before forging a new sense of national identity. But before that storm, the medieval world of France reached its zenith. By the 13th century, French culture was the envy of Europe. Chivalry flourished in the courts of knights and troubadours. The chansons de geste, epic tales of heroism like the Song of Roland, celebrated valor and loyalty. Gothic architecture spread across the continent, inspired by the master builders of France. The economy grew through trade fairs in Champagne and the weaving towns of Flanders, while universities produced theologians whose ideas shaped Western thought. France was not just a kingdom, it was the cultural heart of medieval Europe, the standard by which others measured civilization. Yet beneath the grandeur lay fragility. The feudal order was complex and often unstable. The Black Death in the mid-14th century would soon ravage the population, and the coming war with England would test every structure of power. Still, in the centuries between Hugh Capet and Philip IV, France had undergone an astonishing metamorphosis. From a small royal domain, it had become the largest and most organized monarchy in Europe. Its kings ruled not by brute force alone, but through law, faith, and the enduring myth of divine right. The French people, once divided by local loyalties, now shared a growing sense of unity bound by language, religion, and the idea that their king was God's chosen guardian of the realm. The medieval French monarchy was more than a political institution. It was a living symbol of continuity, standing firm as empires rose and fell around it. The Capetians had achieved what no dynasty before them had done. They had made the crown hereditary, sacred, and central to national identity. Even in times of weakness, the French king was seen as the heart of the nation, the anointed protector of the land. This sacred kingship would endure for centuries, through wars, revolutions, and restorations, until its final collapse in the modern age. But in the age of cathedrals and crusades, of knights and scholars, France had already found its soul. It was no longer the frontier of Rome or the land of the Franks. It was a kingdom with destiny, a realm whose name echoed like a prayer across Europe. France, fille aînée de l'Église. France, eldest daughter of the Church. The story of how France began is as much about faith as it is about power. The Capetians, in their quiet persistence, turned divine belief into political strength. Every coronation at Reims was not just a ceremony, it was a renewal of a sacred covenant between heaven and earth. As oil was poured upon the king's head, it symbolized not just authority but sanctity. The French monarchy thus became something unique, a bridge between the divine and the human, a living embodiment of the Christian order that defined the medieval world. And yet, this divine order would soon face trials unlike any before. The next age would bring fire and famine, rebellion and revelation, and from it would emerge a France reborn once more. For now, however, the medieval kingdom stood proud, its cities bustling, its churches glowing with the light of stained glass, and its people united beneath the fleur-de-lis. The Capetian kings had achieved what seemed impossible when Hugh Capet first placed the crown upon his head. They had turned a fragile feudal realm into a kingdom that would dominate European history. The next centuries would test the limits of that power, but the foundation they built would endure. The road from Clovis to Charlemagne to St. Louis had been long and filled with struggle, yet each had contributed a stone to the edifice that was medieval France. A kingdom born from chaos, guided by faith, and destined for greatness. And so, as the sun set on the 13th century, France stood at the height of its medieval glory, a realm of kings and saints, of scholars and builders, of warriors and dreamers. Its cathedrals rose like prayers carved in stone. Its language blossomed into poetry, and its people began to sense that they belonged to something greater than tribe or lordship. They belonged to France. But beyond the horizon, clouds were gathering. England watched with envy. The plague whispered through the east, and the fragile peace of Christendom trembled. The next act in this story would not be one of harmony, but of survival. For in the fires of war, France would be tested, and in that crucible, a new nation would be born. As the 14th century dawned over France, the golden age of the Capetians faded into the gathering storm of uncertainty. The kingdom that had once stood proud and unified beneath the fleur-de-lis now trembled under the weight of dynastic crisis, famine, and the shifting winds of power that swept across medieval Europe. The death of Charles IV in 1328, without a direct male heir, shattered the fragile order that had held France together for generations. The question of succession ignited a political inferno. By blood, through his mother Isabella, Edward III of England had a claim to the French throne. Yet the French nobility, determined to preserve their independence from foreign rule, invoked the ancient Salic law, declaring that no woman nor her descendants could inherit the crown. Thus, Philip VI of Valois ascended to the throne, marking the birth of a new royal line and the beginning of a conflict that would shape the destiny of both France and England for over a century, the 100 Years' War. It was a war not merely of kings and crowns, but of identity, pride, and the very soul of a nation still in the making. The early years of the war were a brutal awakening. England, though smaller and less wealthy, was unified, disciplined, and driven by ambition. Edward III saw in France both opportunity and divine right. His armies, disciplined and deadly with the longbow, descended upon French soil like a storm. The battles of Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers in 1356 would echo through history as humiliating defeats for the French chivalry, who clung to outdated ideals of knightly valor in the face of modern warfare. At Crécy, the English longbowmen decimated the French cavalry, transforming the battlefield into a slaughterhouse of fallen nobles. The blind King John II of Bohemia, fighting beside the French out of order, perished in the chaos. His bravery immortalized, but his cause lost. A decade later at Poitiers, the French king himself, John II, known as John the Good, was captured by the English, leaving his son, the Dauphin Charles, to rule a fractured kingdom under the shadow of humiliation. The war was not only fought with swords and arrows, but with suffering that reached the very heart of the people. The countryside burned under endless raids known as the Chevauchés scorched earth campaigns that left villages in ashes and fields barren. The peasants bore the worst of it, crushed under taxation and the cruelty of both armies. Starvation, poverty, and despair became daily realities. And as if war were not enough, nature unleashed its own wrath. In 1347, a silent killer arrived on the ships that docked in Marseille, Black Death. Within 2 years, the plague swept across France like an invisible fire, killing millions, erasing entire towns, and leaving the survivors haunted by grief and fear. Priests fell beside peasants, nobles beside beggars. The social order itself began to crumble. Fields went untended, labor became scarce, and the rigid bonds of feudalism began to weaken as the world itself seemed to unravel. In the wake of the plague, rebellion simmered. The peasants, long exploited, now rose in fury against their oppressors. The Jacquerie Revolt of 1358 was one of the most violent expressions of popular rage in medieval Europe. Armed with little more than farm tools, peasants stormed castles, slaughtered nobles, and demanded justice. But their uprising was met with savage retribution. Thousands were massacred, and the revolt was crushed. Yet its echo lingered. It was a warning to the lords that the people's patience had limits. Meanwhile, the Dauphin Charles, later crowned Charles V, began the slow process of restoration. Known as Charles the Wise, he understood that France could not win through might alone. He reorganized the administration, reformed the army, and fortified the kingdom's finances. By relying on capable men like Bertrand du Guesclin, a Breton knight of humble birth but unmatched tactical genius, Charles reclaimed much of the territory lost to the English. The French monarchy was learning to adapt, to replace the sword of pride with the mind of strategy. But as the 14th century waned, new storms gathered. The death of Charles V in 1380 brought his young son, Charles VI, to the throne, a king whose mind would falter even as his crown glared. Known to history as Charles the Mad, his reign plunged France into chaos. His bouts of insanity left the kingdom leaderless, torn between rival factions: the Armagnacs, loyal to the royal family, and the Burgundians, who sought power through alliance with England. Civil war tore France apart, brother against brother, noble against noble. Into this fractured land marched the English once more, led by Henry V, a warrior king of ruthless efficiency. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, Under muddy skies and amid the rain-soaked fields of northern France, the flower of French chivalry was again cut down. Thousands of knights lay dead, their armor sinking into the mud that became their grave. The victory secured English dominance, and soon after, Henry forced the Treaty of Troyes upon the broken French crown, declaring himself heir to the throne of France through marriage to Catherine, daughter of the Mad King. For a moment, it seemed the dream of an independent France had died. Yet history is shaped not only by kings and generals, but by unexpected saviors. In 1429, from the small village of Domremy, a teenage peasant girl named Jeanne d'Arc Joan of Arc heard voices that she believed came from God, commanding her to drive out the English and crown the rightful king, the Dauphin Charles VII. At a time when France was on its knees, she became its beating heart. With unshakable faith and divine conviction, she inspired armies, revived hope, and defied the world's expectations. Her presence alone turned the tide. At the Siege of Orleans, she led French forces to a miraculous victory, breaking the English siege that had strangled the city for months. Soon after, she escorted the Dauphin to Reims, where he was crowned king in the ancient ceremony of the French monarchs, a moment that reignited the nation's spirit. Joan's triumph was brief but eternal. Captured by the Burgundians and handed over to the English, she was tried for heresy, condemned, and burned at the stake in Rouen in 1431. But her martyrdom transformed her from peasant to legend, from rebel to saint. The flame that consumed her body lit the path to France's rebirth. After her death, Charles VII took up the cause she had died for. Under his leadership, France underwent a profound transformation. The army was reformed into a standing force, reducing dependence on feudal levies and mercenaries. The crown regained control over taxation and justice, laying the foundation for centralized authority. Slowly, methodically, the French pushed back the English, reclaiming their lands. By 1453, with the fall of Bordeaux, the 100 Years' War came to an end. England was driven from all French soil except Calais. The war had lasted more than a century, but it had given birth to something enduring, a French nation bound not by feudal ties, but by shared suffering, faith, and identity. The people no longer fought for their lords. They fought for France. The 15th century ushered in a new dawn. The wounds of war began to heal, and the energies once spent on survival turned toward creation. The Renaissance, born in Italy, began to spread northward, and France opened its arms to the new spirit of art, science, and humanism. Kings like Louis XI, the universal spider, wove webs of diplomacy and intrigue to strengthen royal power. By marrying alliances and crushing rebellious nobles, he laid the groundwork for a strong, centralized monarchy. France became a laboratory of modern governance, where the divine right of kings began to emerge as both ideology and instrument. The arts flourished. Architecture evolved, blending Gothic grandeur with Renaissance harmony. Leonardo da Vinci himself spent his final years in France, invited by Francis I, the Renaissance king who transformed the royal court into a center of culture and intellect. Francis's reign in the early 16th century marked the beginning of France's ascent as Europe's artistic and political heart. The chateaux of the Loire Valley stood as symbols of elegance and ambition, their walls adorned with frescoes, their halls echoing with the music of a reborn age. Under Francis I, the French language was elevated, literature thrived, and humanist ideas flourished. The king established the Collège de France, promoting learning free from ecclesiastical control. Yet even in this age of light, shadows remained. The Reformation, spreading from Germany, fractured the unity of Christendom. France found itself torn between Catholics and Protestants, the Huguenots. The wars of religion that erupted in the latter half of the 16th century drenched the kingdom once more in blood. The massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day in 1572, where thousands of Huguenots were slaughtered in Paris, remains one of the darkest stains on French history. The dream of Renaissance harmony gave way to fanaticism and fear. But from this chaos emerged a new monarch who would restore order. Henry IV of Navarre. A Protestant by birth, he converted to Catholicism with the pragmatic declaration that Paris is well worth a mass. His Edict of Nantes in 1598 granted religious tolerance, ending decades of war and earning him the title Good King Henry. Under his rule, France found peace, prosperity, and a renewed sense of unity. As the 17th century dawned, France stood at the threshold of modernity. The monarchy, once fragile, was now strong and confident. Henry IV's assassination in 1610 could have plunged the nation back into turmoil, but his successors, guided by shrewd ministers like Cardinal Richelieu, continued his vision of centralized power. Richelieu, serving under Louis XIII, broke the might of the nobles and curbed the influence of the Huguenots, declaring that the king's authority was absolute. He redefined the monarchy as the embodiment of the state l'état, c'est moi, as Louis XIV would later proclaim. Under Richelieu and his successor, Cardinal Mazarin, France became the dominant power in Europe, both feared and admired. The long medieval struggle between crown and vassals had finally ended. The age of absolute monarchy had begun. Louis XIV, the Sun King, ascended to the throne in 1643 and reigned for more than 7 decades, turning France into the envy of the world. His palace at Versailles became the stage on which royal power performed its grandeur. Every corridor, every fountain, every mirror reflected the glory of a king who saw himself as chosen by God to rule. Under his reign, art, music, literature, and architecture flourished. Molière, Racine, Lully, and Le Brun shaped a culture of refinement that would define French civilization for centuries. But Louis's ambition was boundless. He expanded France's borders through war, draining its treasury even as its prestige grew. His centralized administration, while efficient, demanded absolute obedience. The nobility were tamed not by violence, but by vanity, kept close at court under the dazzling lights of Versailles. The Sun King's brilliance illuminated Europe, but his shadow grew long. The same system that made France mighty also sowed the seeds of future unrest, an empire of glory built on the burdens of the poor. By the end of the 17th century, France had emerged from its medieval past transformed. From the ashes of feudalism, through the fires of war and the radiance of the Renaissance, it had become the cultural, political, and intellectual center of Europe. The idea of France, as a nation, as a civilization, as a beacon of art and power, was now fully formed. But history, relentless as the tide, was not finished. The centuries to come would test the very foundations that the Capetians had built, that Joan of Arc had inspired, and that Louis XIV had glorified. The story of France was no longer just about kings and crowns. It was about people, revolution, and the eternal struggle for liberty. Yet before that storm would rise, the old order would shine its brightest light, a light that, even as it dazzled the world, foreshadowed the coming of a new dawn that would forever change France and the world beyond. As the dawn of revolution gave way to the storm of change, France stood at the crossroads of its own destiny. Its past grandeur weighed against the fury of its people and the promise of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The old order had been torn apart by fire and blood, and from its ashes rose a nation struggling to define what freedom truly meant. The guillotine, once the symbol of justice, became a haunting shadow over the streets of Paris, where both tyrants and dreamers met their end under the blade. Yet amid this chaos, the soul of France refused to perish. The ideals born from the Enlightenment, reason, rights, and rebellion, had taken root too deeply to be extinguished. Out of this tumult emerged one of history's most extraordinary figures, Napoleon Bonaparte, a man whose rise from humble Corsican beginnings to imperial throne would forever alter the course of France and Europe. His story was the story of a nation seeking order after an age of upheaval, ambition after an era of despair. Through military brilliance and sheer will, Napoleon forged an empire that stretched from Spain to Poland, carrying the torch of revolution in one hand and the sword of conquest in the other. To many, he was the savior of France, the man who restored pride and unity to a fractured land. To others, he was a despot cloaked in the rhetoric of liberty, who replaced kings with emperors and ideals with ambition. Even his critics could not deny that under his reign, France was transformed. The Napoleonic Code brought lasting reforms laws that emphasized merit over birth, equality before justice, and the secular authority of the state. These principles, born of revolutionary fervor and imperial pragmatism, would echo through centuries and across continents. But empires built on conquest seldom endure, and Napoleon's relentless wars eventually turned triumph into tragedy. The disastrous invasion of Russia, the shattering defeat at Leipzig, and the final humiliation at Waterloo marked the end of his reign, but not the end of his legend. France, once again, was left to pick up the pieces, torn between nostalgia for glory and the fatigue of endless war. The Bourbon monarchy returned, fragile and uncertain, trying to reclaim a crown that no longer commanded unquestioned loyalty. The world had changed. The people had tasted power, and no king could easily undo that transformation. The 19th century unfolded as a restless era of revolution and reinvention for France. The Industrial Revolution began reshaping cities, and Paris, that eternal heart of France, became both a symbol of progress and protest. The July Revolution of 1830 overthrew one king and brought another, Louis Philippe, the citizen king, whose attempt to balance monarchy with middle-class liberalism satisfied neither the poor nor the powerful. The barricades rose again in 1848, and for a brief, shining moment, France declared a second republic, proclaiming universal male suffrage and the dream of democracy. But even republics can be fragile when hunger, poverty, and ambition conspire. Out of this chaos, another Bonaparte emerged, Louis Napoleon, nephew of the great emperor, who promised stability and glory once more. In 1852, he crowned himself Emperor Napoleon III, and France entered the Second Empire. Under his rule, Paris was reborn. Baron Haussmann's grand boulevards replaced the medieval maze of streets, creating the modern city we recognize today, a city of light, of spectacle, of imperial confidence. Railways spread, industries flourished, and France, once again, stood proud among Europe's powers. Yet beneath this glittering facade lay discontent. The working class toiled under harsh conditions. Intellectuals debated liberty and empire, and in the far reaches of the world, France built colonies that would later test its conscience. Then came the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, a catastrophe that shattered the empire and humbled the nation. Napoleon III was captured, Paris was besieged, and amid the rubble rose the Third Republic, fragile yet determined to endure. The Paris Commune followed a brief, bloody experiment in radical democracy, crushed by the new government, but remembered as a spark of defiance. From this crucible of defeat and resistance, modern France began to take shape. The late 19th century was an age of contradictions, scientific triumphs and political scandals, cultural brilliance and colonial expansion. Artists like Monet and Renoir painted light itself, while writers like Victor Hugo and Émile Zola gave voice to both the beauty and the brutality of French society. The Eiffel Tower rose over Paris as a symbol of progress, defying critics who called it a monstrosity. In Africa and Asia, France extended its reach, building an empire that would one day crumble, but whose influence still lingers in language, culture, and law. As the 20th century dawned, France stood proud but uneasy. Beneath its cultural and intellectual dominance, tensions brewed between republicans and royalists, church and state, rich and poor. Nothing could prepare the nation for the horrors of the Great War. When World War I erupted in 1914, France found itself once again on the front lines of history. From the Marne to Verdun, millions fought and died defending the soil that had seen centuries of struggle. The cost was unimaginable, the victory bittersweet. France emerged from the war scarred but victorious, its fields littered with the ghosts of a generation. The interwar years brought instability, political division, and the uneasy rise of new ideologies across Europe. Then, in 1940, the nightmare returned. Nazi Germany swept across France with devastating speed, and the proud nation that had once defied kings now found itself under occupation. Paris fell. The Vichy regime collaborated. Resistance fighters rose from the shadows. And a new kind of heroism was born not in palaces or on battlefields, but in secret networks, coded messages, and acts of defiance. Charles de Gaulle, exiled but unbroken, became the voice of free France, rallying his people from London with the call that France was not dead. When liberation came in 1944, it was both triumph and reckoning. The post-war era was one of reconstruction and reinvention. The Fourth Republic struggled with instability and colonial wars in Indochina and Algeria. But from these crises emerged the Fifth Republic, forged under the leadership of de Gaulle in 1958. His vision restored presidential authority and national pride, steering France into a modern age of democracy, industry, and global influence. From the tribes of Gaul to the might of the Franks, from medieval chivalry to revolutionary fire, from imperial ambition to democratic idealism, the journey of France is the journey of civilization itself, a nation that has fallen and risen more times than any other, and each time redefined what it means to be free. Its story is not one of perfection, but of persistence, not of conquest, but of conviction. Through centuries of transformation, France has remained a beacon of art, thought, and resistance, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, the flame of humanity can endure. The untold ancient story of France lives on in every street of Paris, every word of its poets, every song of its people, and in the enduring ideals that have inspired the world for generations.